In 1995, just 14 wolves were released into Yellowstone, a park stripped bare of its wild predators. The experiment was so radical many warned it would destroy the park. Yet within 5 years, rivers moved, forests regrew, and scientists were left stunned by a cascade of changes more dramatic than anyone imagined. How did so few animals trigger a transformation the world still debates today? Here is what happened next. Yellowstone once echoed with the calls of wolves, cougars, and grizzly bears. By the early 20th century, those voices had fallen silent. Federal predator control campaigns swept through the park, aiming to make the wilderness safe for tourists and livestock. Rangers poisoned dens, set traps, and tracked packs across the snowy valleys. In 1926, the last wolf in Yellowstone was killed, a fact recorded not in legend, but in official park reports. With the top predators gone, a new imbalance took hold. Elk, once kept in check by wolves, multiplied unchecked. The northern range, which historically supported around 4,000 elk, swelled to nearly 19,000 by the mid-1990s. Herds grazed riverbanks bare, stripping young willows, aspens, and cottonwoods before they could mature. Over decades, the valley floors turned from lush thickets to open dirt and grass. Beaver colonies, dependent on woody plants to build their dams, vanished. By 1995, only one beaver colony remained in the entire park. Without beaver dams to slow the rivers, water ran faster and cut deeper into the banks. Songbird numbers plummeted as nesting shrubs disappeared. Grizzly bears, deprived of berries and fish-rich wetlands, struggled to find enough food. Park managers tried culling elk, planting trees, and building erosion barriers, but nothing reversed the decline. The landscape was caught in a downward spiral. For 70 years, Yellowstone's web of life unraveled, leaving behind a battered ecosystem that seemed beyond repair. The Endangered Species Act, passed in 1973, gave federal wildlife managers a mandate and the legal authority to restore lost species. For Yellowstone, that meant wolves. After decades of debate, the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service released a final environmental impact statement in 1994, clearing the way for action. In the dead of winter in 1995, a team led by biologist Doug Smith traveled north to Alberta, Canada. There, under a slate-gray sky, they tracked wolf packs by helicopter, darted them from above, and carefully loaded the sedated animals into padded crates. 14 wolves arrived at Yellowstone in January 1995, transported across the border under the glare of news cameras and the watchful eyes of both supporters and critics. Inside the park, 3 one-acre acclimation pens stood ready in the Lamar Valley and nearby sites. For 10 weeks, the wolves lived in these enclosures. Biologists fed them elk carcasses, monitored their health, and watched for signs of stress. The pens were not just cages, they were a buffer, designed to help the wolves adjust and to discourage them from trying to return north once released. Outside the fences, the political storm continued. Lawsuits challenged the legality of the project, and some local ranchers vowed to shoot any wolf that crossed park boundaries. Still, the team pressed on. In March 1995, the gates swung open. The wolves stepped into a landscape that had not seen their kind in 70 years. The experiment was underway. The following year, 17 more wolves arrived from British Columbia, swelling the founding population to 31. Doug Smith and his colleagues tracked every movement, documenting the first tentative steps of a species reclaiming its old ground. Expectations were high, but no one could predict what would unfold next. Wolves had barely set foot on Yellowstone ground before the elk began to act differently. For decades, elk had grazed the river valleys without worry, stripping young willows and aspens until nothing remained but stunted shoots. Now, with the return of their old predator, the elk grew restless. They stopped lingering in the open. Herds moved quickly through the lowlands, heads up, ears flicking at every sound, never sure if a wolf pack was watching from the shadows. This new vigilance changed everything. Without the constant pressure of elk browsing, young willow stems shot upward, reaching heights Yellowstone had not seen in generations. In some valleys, willows that once struggled to reach half a meter now soared above 3 meters, tall enough to shelter songbirds and shade the water's edge. Aspen groves, once written off as lost, sent up thousands of saplings. Cottonwoods, long absent from the riverbanks, began to take root again. The transformation was most dramatic where elk felt the greatest risk, along narrow creeks and bends where escape was difficult. There, the landscape shifted from bare dirt to dense thickets in just a few years. Biologists measured the changes with a sense of disbelief. Willow cover, which had barely budged for 70 years, multiplied many times over in less than a decade. The old pattern, elk eating every new shoot before it could grow, was broken. Plants that had been on the brink now flourished, setting the stage for the next wave of returning life. Beavers had nearly vanished from Yellowstone by the 1990s, their numbers reduced to a single struggling colony. But as willows and cottonwoods returned to the riverbanks, the beavers followed. By 2005, biologists counted 9 active colonies in the northern valleys, a 10-fold increase in just a decade. Today, more than a dozen colonies thrive in the park, each one a hub of construction and transformation. With fresh willow shoots and young trees now abundant, beavers set about building dams and lodges at a pace the park hadn't seen in generations. Their dams slowed the rush of water, spreading it out into ponds and wetlands. These new wetlands became magnets for life. Frogs croaked in the shallows, ducks nested among the reeds, and fish found shelter in the cool, deep pools. Water tables rose, and once dry meadows stayed green through the summer. The impact reached beyond the ponds themselves. Where beaver dams dotted the creeks, river channels narrowed and deepened. Banks that had crumbled under decades of erosion stabilized as roots and woody debris held the soil in place. Remote sensing and aerial surveys revealed patterns that echoed across the landscape. In valleys where beavers returned, rivers that had sprawled wide and shallow now ran tighter, more defined courses. The changes weren't uniform. Some stretches remained stubbornly altered by earlier decades of damage. But in the beaver-rich drainages, the transformation was clear. The engineers were back, and with them, the shape of Yellowstone's rivers began to change. William Ripple points to the numbers. About 100 wolves now roam the park, while the northern range elk herd holds steady at roughly 5,000, down from nearly 20,000 at the peak. Ripple's team measures willow height, aspen recruitment, and beaver colony growth. arguing that these shifts trace directly to wolves reshaping elk behavior and density. But Scott Creel and his colleagues challenge the methods. They scrutinize sampling, question whether vegetation gains are as widespread as claimed, and note that harsh winters, human hunting, and drought also thinned elk herds. Both sides pore over the same figures, drawing different lines between cause and effect. In Yellowstone, the evidence is clear, but its meaning is still contested. Each camp convinced its interpretation best fits the facts. For ranchers living on the park's edge, the return of wolves felt less like a scientific experiment and more like a threat to their way of life. Each spring, the phone lines lit up with reports. Calves and lambs were found dead, and tracks circled the herds. Official counts put annual livestock losses from wolves in the low hundreds, a fraction compared to the region's more than 1 million cattle and sheep. But for families who lost animals overnight, numbers meant little. Insurance payments and federal compensation rarely covered the stress, the long nights, or the fear that the next season could be worse. Meanwhile, wolf watchers poured into the region, binoculars and cameras in hand, filling hotels and restaurants. Tourism brought tens of millions of dollars each year, but the benefits rarely reached the ranch gates. The tension between old livelihoods and new economies played out in town meetings and around kitchen tables, where the value of a single lost cow clashed with the promise of a thriving wild landscape. Today, Yellowstone's wolves prove that restoring just one keystone species can trigger an ecological rebirth visible from space. As global debates rage over rewilding, Yellowstone stands as living evidence. Sometimes the wild only needs one chance and the courage to let it return. What would you restore next?